Before we can talk about the scope of a bean, we should probably get on the same page about what a bean even is. Think of a Spring application as a complex machine, kind of like a car engine. This engine is built from many different parts that all need to work together. Pistons, spark plugs, crankshaft, and other engine parts. In a Spring application, these individual parts are called beans. A bean is simply an object that is created, assembled, and otherwise managed by the Spring IOC container. You don't have to manually create these objects yourself. Spring does the heavy lifting for you. So, what kind of objects become beans? It could be a service that handles business logic, like calculating a user's shopping cart total. It could be a repository that talks to your database to fetch customer data. It might even be a simple configuration object that holds important settings for your application. You tell Spring, hey, I need an object of this type, by marking a class with an annotation like @component@service Spring, then sees this, creates an instance of that object for you, and keeps it in its container, ready to be used whenever and wherever it's needed. This process, known as dependency injection, is what makes Spring so powerful. It decouples your components, making your application easier to manage, test, and maintain. Now that we know Spring manages a collection of beans for us, the next logical question is, how many instances of each bean does Spring create? Does it create just one order service for the entire application to share, or does it create a brand new order service every single time something asks for it? This is precisely where the concept of bean scope comes into play. The scope of a bean defines the lifecycle and visibility of that bean instance. It's a rule that tells the Spring container how to manage the creation of a particular bean. Think of it like ordering coffee at a cafe. If you and your friend both order a latte, does the barista pour from a single giant pot of pre-made latte that everyone shares? Or does the barista make two separate, fresh lattes, one for you and one for your friend? The bean scope is the instruction you give the barista. It determines whether you get a shared instance or a unique one. This decision might seem small, but it has significant implications for your application's performance, memory usage, and even its correctness, especially when dealing with stateful information. Why does this matter so much? Imagine a bean that represents a user's shopping cart. If this bean were shared by every single user of your e-commerce website, it would be chaos. When one user adds an item to their cart, it would appear in everyone else's cart too. That's a catastrophic bug. In this case, you would need a separate, unique shopping cart bean for each user. Conversely, for a bean that connects to a database, it might be very inefficient to create a new connection object every time you need to run a query. It's often better to have a single shared instance that manages a pool of connections. Let's start with the two most fundamental scopes in Spring Singleton prototype. The Singleton scope is the default, and it's the one you'll use most often. When a bean is declared as a singleton, the Spring IOC container creates exactly one instance of that bean for the entire application. No matter how many times you ask for that bean from different parts of your code, you will always get a reference to the very same object. This is like the master key to a building. Everyone who needs access gets a copy of the same key, but there's only one original lock it opens. This is perfect for stateless beans, such as services, repositories, controllers. A user service bean, for example, typically doesn't need to hold any user-specific data within itself. On the opposite end of the spectrum is the prototype scope. When you declare a bean as a prototype, the Spring container creates a brand new instance every single time it's requested. If your order controller asks for a prototype scoped bean, it gets a new one. If your payment service asks for the same bean, it gets another completely separate new one. This is ideal for stateful beans, where you need to maintain data that is specific to one particular task or user action, and you don't want that data to interfere with other tasks. Think of it like a disposable coffee cup. Every customer gets a fresh new cup. To define a prototype bean, you use the @scope annotation. For example, you might have a shopping cart bean that holds the items a user wants to buy. You would never want this to be a singleton. You'd annotate it like this, @component iScope prototype. This ensures that every time a user starts a shopping session, they get their own private shopping cart object. Using prototype is essential when you need to guarantee that one object's state will not bleed over and affect another's, ensuring data isolation and thread safety for mutable objects. Alright, so, beyond the core scopes, Spring actually provides several other scopes specifically designed for web applications. These only work if you're in a web-aware Spring application context. The first, and honestly a very useful one, is the request scope. A bean with request scope is created once for every single HTTP request that comes into your application. If two users hit your website at the same time, or if one user makes two separate requests, Spring will create a distinct instance of the bean for each request. Once the request is complete and a response is sent back, the bean is destroyed. This is incredibly useful for holding request-specific data, like user tracking information per request transactional data. For example, you could have a request details bean that holds the user's IP address that holds the endpoint they accessed. To set this scope, you use the @scope annotation with a special value. The proxy mode part is often necessary. Next up is the session scope. This scope creates a bean instance for each user's HTTP session. As long as the user is logged in and their session is active, they will always get the same instance of this bean. If they log out and log back in, or if another user logs in, a new instance will be created for that session. This is the perfect scope for our shopping cart example from earlier. By making the shopping cart a session-scoped bean, you tie its lifecycle directly to a user's session, ensuring they don't lose their cart items as they navigate between pages. Finally, there are the application and WebSocket scopes. Application scope. The application scope is very similar to Singleton but tied to the servlet context. It creates one bean instance for the entire web application. Use cases: application-wide configuration, shared caches. WebSocket scope. The WebSocket scope ties the lifecycle of a bean to a WebSocket session. A new bean instance is created when a WebSocket connection is established and is destroyed when the connection is closed, perfect for managing state for a single client connected over a WebSocket. So, we've seen all these different scopes, but how do we put it all together? The key takeaway: choosing the right bean scope is fundamental to a healthy, scalable, bug-free Spring app. The vast majority of your beans will and should be Singleton. Services, repositories, configurations. This is the most efficient scope for stateless logic, and Spring makes it the default. Stick with Singleton unless you have a very clear reason not to. Deviate from the default when you encounter state. When a bean needs to hold data specific to a user, specific to a request, specific to a task, for short-lived, single-thread mutable objects, Prototype is your go-to choice. It guarantees a fresh, clean slate every time, preventing leftover data reuse, prevents concurrency issues, ensures data integrity in stateful components.